You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you on another day. It's a Tuesday. If you're listening to this the day that I recorded it, whenever you're listening to it, doesn't really matter. It's a much better day for some. It's a more pessimistic day for others. You never know. It's hard to know the psyche of the Utah fan base right now based on how everything's been going on. So we're going to jump right into all that. And we're going to go a little shorter today than normal. Got a lot to cover, but I wanted to get this out there before I had to run to a meeting. So, let's jump into this. So today we're to preview this episode, we're going to do a little Devon Dampier news. We'll jump back into the Kyle Whittingham saga. It never ends. And then we'll do another look at the transfer portal. But first, before we do that, let me tell you about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. Big dreams don't just belong in your imagination. At Canyon View Credit Union, we help turn those dreams into reality. From application to celebration, we're by your side every step of the way because home isn't just a place, it's the people you share it with. At Canyon View Credit Union, flexible options and expert guidance help you create a home that's truly yours, the perfect place to gather and belong. Guiding you home, Canyon View Credit Union. To learn more details, visit canyonviewcu.com. All right, let's just get right into this because, like I said, we got a lot to talk about, and I don't have a lot of time. So we're just going to get into this with the Devon Dampier stuff. If you listened to my last week episode, you heard me say that Devon Dampier was coming back. We were waiting for an announcement that day. That was Thursday. It did not come. It's been a long weekend of when is he going to release the video that says he's coming back to Utah. And finally today, Tuesday afternoon, he decided to release that. So Utah fans, you've got your starting quarterback back in the on the side, not the sidelines, on the field, whatever we want to say right here. He's back. That's all it is. Devon Dampier is back. He's ready to go, and that's a great opportunity for Utah to be able to have your starting quarterback, to be able to have some consistency, and quite honestly, just a great opportunity for Morgan Scalley to not have too much of a hurdle, as if there wasn't already a hurdle for him in his first season as head coach. But you do get a lot more consistency than what it could have been. So he announces his return in a video today. As you can expect, it has Spider-Man in there. It's also an AI generation of, a famous quote. I'll let you go listen to it because it's partially not appropriate for me to say this on a podcast, but he bleeps it out. But he's coming back. Let's just say that. How about that? Anyways, so just kind of a quick look back on his stats for the last year. So for the year, he finished by throwing for 2,490 yards, 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and he did that completing 63.5% of his passes, which gave him a 146.8 rating and an average of 207.5 yards per game. So not a ton in terms of the passing game. I mean, it's still a good number. He played in 12 games, obviously missed one game, but it's not like some earth-shattering numbers. And we all understand that because you watched this season and you understand that Utah was not a pass-heavy team. That was the big emphasis for the season of why Utah can't get the pass game going. But at the same time, this is a team that utilized its strengths. They utilized its offensive line that's going to have 2 potential first-round draft picks in there. You've got a running back in Wayshawn Parker who did a lot of damage back there, as well as many other people, including Devon Dampier. And, you really embraced the run game, and you broke a school record as that relates to that, right? Like you go in there and you really embrace that and did really well. So, really, really impressive effort there. But just looking at his passing numbers, one of the biggest knocks, if you remember, for Devon Dampier coming in was his high touchdown to interception ratio. It was 1-to-1. He threw 12 touchdowns and 12 interceptions last year meaning his last season. Whatever, you know what I'm saying. With New Mexico. And so, there was questions on his ability to be able to be a passer. Yes, he did throw for a little bit more yards in 27.68, so not much, but you give him an extra game and he's going to get that. He also completed 57.9% of his passes at New Mexico. So what he did this last year is he doubled his touchdowns. So he went from 12 touchdowns to 24. He cut his interceptions in half. He went from 12 to 5. It's actually a little more than half, but you get the drift. And he increased his completion percentage by a little more than 5% and also had a higher rating. So in all accounts, as a passer, Devon Dampier absolutely took a major leap forward this last year. There just wasn't a ton of production, right? You weren't getting a ton from him in what he was doing with Utah simply because of where they were at. They didn't have the wide receivers early, at least. That's what was the messaging to be able to do that. Some of that was developing some chemistry, that kind of stuff. But Utah really embraced the run, and for good reason. Now, to that point, Dampier finished with 835 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns. He averaged 5.7 per game. Came out to about 70 yards per game from Dampier. And I know, that stressed out a lot of people worrying about his injury. And yes, he did get injured this season, had a nagging ankle injury, but his biggest injury was actually a hernia. And so he had surgery for that last week. And that was what limited him more than most things. And so that wasn't announced until later. That's something that was always on the radar, and something that he was dealing with, which kind of shows some of the struggles that he did have. But overall, I mean, this is a guy that went in there and gave everything that he had. So little less rushing yards than what he did at New Mexico. At New Mexico, he put up 1166 and 19 touchdowns, averaged 7.52 for an average about 97 per game. But he was also expected to be the offense at New Mexico. They just, you talk to Jason Beck and he talked about him being the guy, right? Like you need yards, you need something. You knew that you could rely on Devon Dampier to be your guy to be able to do that. Whereas at Utah, obviously he was a major factor in the offense and being able to utilize the RPO and the run game and everything else that Utah was doing, but he didn't have to be the guy, right? Like there was many other people that he could turn to, whether that be in the passing attack or in the run game where they could turn to. So, all in all, an efficient season. Obviously, Utah would like to have more, right? They truly believe that there can be more from Devon. If he can do this, in 1 year, what can he do the next year? And people forget, too, that this is jumping up to another level, right? You're coming from the Mountain West now into the Big 12, and, you can debate amongst yourself on whether there's that big of a jump or not, but it's still a jump up in competition, and he improved in all those. And so if you can, in theory, build on that for this next year and he can continue to improve, all the better for Utah, because you already saw what he's capable of and what he can do, especially if he can stay healthy. And in that position, it's tough, especially if it's going to be a mobile quarterback. But you're also bringing in an offensive coordinator that is much more intent on wanting to look to the pass first. So I'm really curious to see kind of how Devon grows, if at all. I'm assuming he will. I can't imagine he doesn't, but how he can grow in the passing attack, where that is going to be the emphasis. It's going to be an emphasis on explosive plays. It's going to be an emphasis on trying to get those receivers open and understanding whether they can, hurt the defense and being able to utilize it that way. So really fascinated to kind of see how that takes shape. You saw a glimpse of that with Jason Beck, mind you, but you did see a different look there where the pass became much more an emphasis in the game plan. And Dampier threw for 310 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, completed at 61%, then rushed for 148 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, this was a complete game by Devon, and actually finished with the highest PFF grades for a game of his entire career. So he finished with a 91.6 on offense and a 90.4 in passing. That's the highest, like I said, by a significant margin of any game that he's played. Most have been in the 70s or 80s for Devon, but this was one of those games that anybody that watched obviously saw that he was on another level. But I think this shows kind of a glimpse into what Dampier can be. And obviously there's going to be different pass catchers. There's going to be different guys that he throws to in part. But at the same time, this has potential to kind of showcase what he can be. Now, what that means ultimately for this team is not only do you get Devon Dampier, Bird Ficklin, which we've already known, he also released something last week or earlier this week that says he's returning. Like I said, that's already been known. He'd signed his contract. Devon had signed a new contract recently. Both of these players are coming back, but that adds now two proven commodities at quarterback. We still obviously want to see more with Bird Ficklin, but you've got two guys that in theory can continue to play off each other, continue to be friends, and do what they do on the field in a way that can make things really challenging for opposing defenses. As this goes, there were times out there where you had one of them as a wide receiver, one of them under center, and unless you're going to throw it to them, I don't know that you want to take another body out there, but I think it's still the threat that a run could be coming, and so you can utilize that in a way where you can open up the passing game, right? But at the same time, look, if there's better wide receiver options out there, that's probably the best bet to go, but I'm really curious to see how Kevin McGivern utilizes the strengths of both of these players, because leaving Bird just on the sidelines as simply a backup is probably a mistake. But you obviously have to lean in on Devon Dampier as well. So really fascinated to see what happens there, but you do get those two players back. You get an opportunity for them to get that consistency and build some consistency with the receiving room. You get Wayshawn Parker back. Obviously a big opportunity for Utah. He finished the year with 981 yards and 6 touchdowns. Utah tried its best in the Las Vegas Bowl to get him to 1,000 yards. And I truly believe that if he's given the bulk of the carries the entirety of the season, he gets there, right? He obviously split a lot of those, especially early on with N'Kerry Rogers. And, I think if you get him a little bit more acclimated into the offense and being more of a featured back there, Utah can absolutely get him to 1,000 yards. He's got the capabilities there, and he can do it. Now, Utah's adding a few running backs in the room that are going to help that, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But this is an opportunity for Utah to continue to add that consistency with now your star running back as well. So now you've got your 3-star runners as well as 2, quarterbacks that can do a lot of damage as well. And then you bring back Hunter Andrews. I think people forget that he, was on the roster after getting hurt early, but he was a game changer for Utah in every facet of what he was able to do. He can run, he can catch, he can do a lot of different things, and you get him back. You get Larry Simmons back, you get Creed Whittemore. In theory, you get Tobias Merriweather. We haven't heard anything from him, and early on I thought he was going to transfer based on some of the things that I heard, but it doesn't sound like that's the case as of right now. Where he factors in remains to be seen. Obviously, he has to be better at catching the ball. And some of that can be the timing with Dampier and Ficklin. Some of that can just be honing in on his skills. We'll see. We'll see if that works. But Utah obviously added Braden Pagan and Kyrie Scholes as well to add to that room. And so there's some good opportunities there for Utah to be able to upgrade and move forward and be able to improve. So all in all, the core, I would say, of the offense is together. Obviously, Utah will have to revamp its offensive line room, and I'm really curious to see how that goes. But there are veteran players that are going to return. You also get Kelvin Obot, the 5-star offensive tackle that'll be in there. Utah has gotten a couple offensive linemen in the portal. It remains to be seen how this all comes together, but it seems like Utah, in theory, isn't going to take that big of a drop back. Now, it's hard to say that when you have two first rounders in there anchoring your tackles. But at the same time, I think Utah's in a good position where they can at least absorb some of the struggles that can be there when you lose all 5 offensive linemen. So we'll see. That's going to be kind of the biggest question that I have. I'm curious to see how Jordan Gross is able to develop that room, what he's able to do early. Can Utah continue to have, 8 or so guys that can be consistently ready? Or is this going to be one of those things where Utah's just scratching to get 5 and hoping that, it can all come together? That's going to be the biggest question. And as much as, Dampier and Ficklin and Parker and all those guys coming back helps Utah, and it will still help Utah, if you have an offensive line that is a sieve, it's not going to work. So really curious to see what happens there, but we're not going to know anything really, honestly, until at minimum spring. So we'll get that. So as part of that, let's move on to, I don't really want to get into this topic again, but rehashing the Kyle Whittingham saga. And look, the reason I'm doing this is simply because of what took place yesterday. Yesterday, Celesi Moa, who had enrolled at school as a true freshman, he was in school for a week, and then announced that he was in the transfer portal. He was actually in Hawaii as part of a like a Senior Bowl type thing, but for high schoolers. And so this obviously comes as a big blow to Utah, and the natural fit there is obviously Michigan, right? His uncle is there in Lewis Powell, and it becomes a natural fit, right? And as much as many will blame Celesi for this, it's the nature of the transfer portal. It's not his fault, right? Moa was not shy about wanting to always play on a bigger stage, which is why he wanted to go to Tennessee. It's why he wanted to be in the SEC. Utah came along again and got him to a point where they showed that they could kind of give him the platform that he needed. But with the shakeup of everything, the desire to go to a bigger program, you can go with familial ties. You can go with a coach that, you're familiar with from the recruiting front. And yes, they had that still at Utah. But you've got all that. It became clear that he wanted to go there. The biggest problem here is, look, Kyle Whittingham said some things as he was leaving before he took the Michigan job that I think has caused a lot of people frustrations, and for good reason, right? And I think we've rehashed this for several weeks now. Is he right? Is he wrong? Is he destroying his legacy? All this kind of stuff, and all of it is right. Quite honestly, it's all right. There's one hand here where you can sit here and say he's doing everything that a normal coach would do when they leave, and they're not wrong, right? Any coach that leaves a program takes coaches, they take players, they take strategies, they take all kinds of things there, right? This is no different. And so to that extent, Kyle Whittingham is doing everything that every other coach before him has done, and doing it in a way that is not too dissimilar from that, right? A lot of former players or recruits will follow that head coach, they'll follow that staff, and they'll move forward. Everybody kind of understands that, right? The biggest challenge here for everybody is that Kyle went out saying that he wanted to set up Utah in a position where they can be successful, where they can grow, and where they can be kind of this established place, where he was just kind of ride out into the sunset kind of stuff and do what he needed to, but knowing that Utah was in a much better spot. Admittedly, that feels hollow. And I don't know that Kyle necessarily intended that from the jump, but the longer this has gone on and the more he's been able to take players out of the portal, a la J.J. Buchanan, Celesi Moa, some of the other guys that we've talked about previously, they were going into the portal regardless of Kyle leaving. These ones feel more intentional, right? You're now purposely trying to inflict harm on Utah. Whether he sees it as harm or just trying to get players that he believes in depends on what side of the coin you're on. Obviously, Utah fans are going to be on the coin that says he's trying to inflict harm on Utah. And you're not wrong, right? It is taking a direct shot at what Morgan Scalley is trying to do, taking one of their highest recruits ever and being able to bring them onto Michigan, while also bringing in a tight end / wide receiver in J.J. Buchanan, who, is still relatively unproven, but clearly showed, especially in the bowl game, what he was capable of if everything kind of comes together. Those are kind of direct shots at that. Now, all of this isn't linear, right? Like, this isn't, Kyle just completely moving to get these guys. They're these kids have other decisions as well, and they want to be able to move forward with it. But at the same time, this is a tough situation for Utah and Kyle Whittingham, simply because one thing was said and another thing is being done. Now, that other thing that's being done is similar to many other coaches before it, but many other coaches didn't say that they were ultimately going to retire. And so this feels very vindictive to the university, to the coaching staff, to the administration, whatever have you, and it becomes a challenge. So whatever the side of the coin you're on, you're not wrong, and that's the problem with this, right? You've got part of the fan base that still wants to honor Kyle and still think that what he's doing is normal, whereas the other part of the fan base is very emotional and very frustrated because you've essentially torn down a lot of what Kyle's built, right? And it just feels like he's tearing apart his legacy all at the same time. And so it's a challenge, and I'm not here to tell you which side you're on. I think it's very fair and appropriate to be frustrated with Kyle, and any harm done over this next year-ish is going to take a very long time for the fans to come around to Kyle Whittingham. And I think you're going to honestly see a lot of hate watching towards Michigan over this next year. The ratings here in Salt Lake City, assuming that that's where the majority of the fan base is coming from, is going to be tuned in heavily to Michigan games simply to hate watch. If there's anybody that potentially could be more hated than BYU right now from the Utah side, it's probably Kyle Whittingham and Michigan, which sounds funny to say simply because of how much this was, he was the legend and he did everything for Utah over 21 years, but it's tough not to have those feelings for a lot of Utah fans, right? And you're valid, right? There's so many people online right now that are trying to tell you, stop complaining, stop worrying about this. No, your opinions and emotions are valid as well. This is college football, right? It's an emotional thing. This isn't the NFL where it's just normal for coaches to continue to move on. Players are signed to contracts, yada, yada, yada. This is very much so tied to your alma mater potentially. This is tied to just a lot of different things. And so if you're frustrated, be frustrated. I'm not going to sit here and tell you not to. And anybody telling you not to just needs to get with it. Because at the same time, this is not something that's dissimilar from any other coach that leaves a program, but this is a completely different situation as well. And so if you want to be able to lean in on Kyle Whittingham and say, okay, he's the greatest of all time at Utah and he built Utah, yada, 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 and you want to continue to praise him, go for it. And anybody telling you need to think another way, they're wrong as well, right? That's the beauty of this situation. You can be on both sides. You can also remember the legacy that Kyle built and appreciate that, while also being incredibly frustrated with that. I think there's so many more people on the fence here than they are one way or the other, right? There's a lot of emotions right now, and a couple months from now, there may be some healing to that. But the immediacy is tough, especially when you keep taking coaches, when you keep taking players, when you keep doing all these things that seemingly undercut what Morgan Scalley is doing. Now, to that front, Morgan Scalley continues to do what he does, and as I've said before, this is a true opportunity for him to put his full fingerprints on the program. No longer is this Kyle Whittingham's program, and there's still going to be some tenants there, and you hear Morgan Scalley talk about this. But this is 100% a Kyle Whittingham or a Morgan Scalley program. And so there's not any worry that there's going to be Morgan Scalley inheriting everything from Kyle, and does he get the credit for this, right? This is Morgan building it not quite from the ground up. There's still obviously a lot of holdover, but he's essentially rebuilding an entire defense. Yes, there's depth players coming in, but from a starting perspective, you're essentially rebuilding an entire defense. You've got some core pieces on the offensive side of the ball, but you're still having to rebuild there. This is Morgan Scalley's roster, and it's going to get more and more that way as the years go on. Obviously, that's no different for any coach, but I think you've now quickly or expedited that situation. So it's frustrating. It's tough. Whichever side of the aisle you are, you're exactly right, and that's not meant to just be patronizing and just getting out of the picking a side. This is just literally one of those situations where both of you are right, and it's a frustrating situation for all around. That's the nature of it is. Hopefully this is the last time we really have to talk about this saga. Those emotions aren't going to go away. For anybody that is harboring frustrations towards Kyle, those emotions are going to stay for a very long time, and we understand that. Look, LeBron James completely thrashed his city and decided to head to Miami in a decision that still to this day was one of the most bizarre PR fronts that we've ever seen. And somehow he came back and played and won a championship there. It happens, right? You can come to it, but I also understand that this takes a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of mending fences, so to speak, and it's going to be a struggle. But the point is, it's all Utah right now, right? It's all Morgan Scalley, and embracing that is kind of the nature of what college football is in these days. You've got to just kind of embrace it and move forward. So with that, just one thing as part of this, and there's been questions as to, if Celesi Moa signed a contract, how can he suddenly get out? And, I have a copy of what Utah's rev share contract is. This was from last year, their first year of that, and it's just a general contract. Some players may have different ones. As I said, this is just a general one. I haven't asked for a new one or anything that way, and so this could be old, it could be not. But essentially what Utah has right now, and I'm not going to read the whole clause there. It's a termination upon transfer clause. Essentially, the last part of it says that once they're in the transfer portal, the student, they let the university know. They let the university say, hey, we're going to be in the transfer portal. The last part of this clause says the agreement will automatically terminate upon the university receiving the transfer notice. That's essentially the extent of it. And so what that means is the contract is not really that binding of a contract. Once you say I'm out, you're out. And so any monies owed for future revenue, which is most of these, they're built out into monthly installments and such. This is essentially just saying whatever money you have received, you'll get that because you've already gone through that. But any future money from the time that you've entered the portal is not coming to you, which means nothing in a lot of respects because the player will receive new money elsewhere. So, right now the verbiage on that definitely needs to be tightened if Utah wants to keep its players. But at the same time, there's a lot of fluidity with that simply because of the legal system and kind of how things are going. So it's not easy. Obviously, with the Demon Williams stuff at Washington, the Big Ten, which is a major difference here, is the Big Ten was a big unifier here because it's a standardized contract utilized between Big Ten schools, helped a lot of this situation. And so I think you're going to see a lot more schools adopt some of what the Big Ten is doing, but there's a high probability that the players that Utah's already signed for the 2026 season are going to have something similar to this, simply because it's so tough to be able to restrict player movement based on actual laws, federal laws, not just NCAA laws, federal laws that prohibit, basically limiting how a player can move. And so there's going to be some workshops here, right? This isn't done, but I think on Utah's side, there's not much that they can do barring them getting some wins in the court, and not just Utah, right? Like all of the NCAA member institutions getting some wins in court to be able to make this more sustainable / being like real contracts. And so we'll see what happens. But essentially right now, Utah has a contract, but it's mostly just kind of a payment thing, just saying, hey, this is what it's going to be. There are things in there, and I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of it, that players have to show up to certain things. They have to do certain things to make the monies work. But at the same time, if you enter the portal, by all accounts, it sounds like you can just leave. Now, caveat again, this is an old contract. It still may be the contract, but I want to make sure that that's out there, that this is kind of the situation it is. It's not any different than most schools out there, simply because it's not been easy to win these in court. So there's that. All right, so looking at the transfer portal, we already talked about the two additions or departures, I should say, from Utah with J.J. Buchanan and Celeste Moa. That's all it's been. At least major players. There's been walk-on players that have left, but for the most part, those are the players. The portal ends on the 16th, so we're getting close to that. Hopefully, by the next time that I podcast, we'll have some updates on that and have some finality to it. Barring some changes, this feels like it's supposed to be it. Utah should be pretty well settled on what their roster is from their current roster. Now it's a matter of just adding more players, and they'll continue to do that because they still have some pieces to fill, but that's kind of where it is. So real quick, looking at some of the players that they've added right now, they've been busy over the last couple days, and the messaging here from Morgan Scalley, and he hasn't said anything to this to a point outside of what was said in that intro presser, is that he's going to look for experience over potential. But that doesn't mean that there isn't potential factored into that, right? But it's looking at potential at the right value. Every single position in college football is going to be very similar to kind of how the NFL models their system, right? Quarterback is obviously going to get paid more than your running back. Running back is dime a dozen in a lot of respects, and so there's not going to be the same there. And so if a player is requesting for money that is X number above what their range is, Utah has to make a choice on if they're going to, if they see this player as being valuable to that, or they just have to say, look, this is the number we're willing to go to. If you want to stay with that, you can stay here. If not, that's the transfer portal. That's never going to change. That's just a normal business. Every NFL team does that. NBA teams do that. That's just the nature of it, right? the biggest frustrations here is there's just been not a lot of bounds on how teams are able to do this. And so somebody that's valued, let's say, at $500,000 here at Utah can say, hey, I feel like I should be valued more at the top end at, let's say, $750,000. Another school can come in and say, yeah, we want to take you up on that potential and take you. That's the nature of it. So that's where it comes. But at the same time, Utah's doing its due diligence here. They're trying to stay within the range. They're trying to increase their money. Every program around the country is trying to do the same thing, and barring some major infusion of cash, and the PE deal hasn't been signed yet, so don't think about that. And not all of that is going to NIL anyway. This is kind of where Utah is going to be. So real quick, looking at who Utah got in the portal since we last chatted on Thursday. Yesterday, they picked up a running back in Steve Chavez Soto. He was a freshman at San Jose State. And the San Jose State, it's been funny. Last year was the New Mexico pipeline coming to Utah. And there was a lot of groaning and, we don't want a Mountain West team players coming to Utah. That's all been changed because Utah's been really satisfied with those players. It's now the San Jose State pipeline. Utah's recruited at least 3 players that have signed to Utah from San Jose State. So, a different Mountain West team that is now coming through here. But Utah finding some value here in Chavez Soto. As a freshman, he rushed for 448 yards and 7 touchdowns. He led the team in rushing. They weren't a huge run team for San Jose State. They relied more on the pass. But he produced and was actually the highest graded player on offense with an 81.3 score or grade. So, really, really good potential there. I've read up on him, and a lot of people see him as kind of a mini Cam Scattaboo. You can love that, you can hate that, whatever that may be, but you're getting a guy that is going to be physical. Potentially could be a third down back. Wayshawn can continue to do what he does. You put Chavez Soto in there, and maybe you get him on a short yardage situations. I don't know. Really curious to see what they do there. And then another player on the offensive side of the ball is offensive lineman Cedric Jefferson. Comes from the FCS champions Montana State as an offensive tackle, big-bodied guy. Had 945 snaps there. Still has a lot to prove. He's coming into his upperclassman seasons, and really curious to see what he can do. But if Jordan Gross can get the potential out of him, you may have an opportunity to utilize him as maybe your right tackle. Maybe he's the guy that you can lean on. The stats haven't always been the best for him, but I think if you can get a proven offensive line coach that can just do simply better at Utah than they can at Montana State, there's potential maybe you see more there. So this is one of the guys that Utah was really hoping for. Great opportunity for Utah to add some size and consistency in the offensive line, but there's still so much to learn about Jefferson to really know what he can do. Really fascinated to kind of see what he does in spring. And then on the defensive line, they've added 2 guys in Jeremo. He's from San Jose State, also a freshman. He was the highest graded player on defense. So Utah gets the highest on offense and defense from San Jose State. As a freshman, he had 28 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks in 11 games. He's a 6-foot guy, 280 pounds, expected to put on more size there. A guy that is produced, but also has such a bigger future ahead of him if he can continue to make those strides. And so you're seeing a little bit about experience in that one, though he's still young. We'll see what happens there. And then Jamal Wallace from Tennessee hasn't played a ton of games, but he's 6'3", 315 pounds. If they can utilize him, you become much more of a guy that can clog the defense. Utah's missed out on that recently, but these 2 guys factor into a room that still has a lot of young talent. And so I'm really curious to see what happens there. And then lastly, Utah has signed 4 corners. You get James Chenault from South Florida. As a sophomore, he's a 6-foot guy. As a sophomore, he had 2 interceptions, 32 tackles, 1 tackles for loss, and 3 pass breakups. This is a guy that they were really after, was one of the kind of top transfer portal players that they wanted, at least in this position. And so they were able to get him yesterday. You already had got a commitment from Elijah Reed from Akron, 6'3" guy. As a junior, he had 2 interceptions, 47 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 4 pass breakups, and 1 forced fumble. Was the 5th highest graded guy on defense and had an NFL passer rating of 58.9. So pretty solid. But, I think you can see something from Sharif Shah that you can utilize what he can do. You also get a JUCO player in Earl Parker, originally from Alaska. He committed yesterday night. And so a young guy coming in, and will have a lot of opportunities ahead of him. And then lastly, a guy that, really just kind of went under the radar as Utah signed him was Nicholas Brown from Lamar, another FCS program, but he was the highest graded player on defense there in just 4 games. And so comes in with, a lot of opportunities ahead of him. Really curious to see what Sharif Shah does with that room and what he's able to manufacture with a lot of these guys. But Utah really building up its defense after losing a lot of guys, and so really curious to see what happens there. But, Utah's going to continue to add some more players. There's a lot of guys that they're going to continue to focus in on. Wide receiver is going to continue to be a emphasis if you can try to get more guys, especially now that you lost Celesi Moa. Potentially get a tight end from the portal. That's still not going to be a huge emphasis in this offense, but it's still going to be utilized. But for the most part, this is kind of where Utah is shaping up to be. They wanted to win on the trenches, and so they've been beefing that up. And you're getting a lot of the guys that they've wanted. Some of the guys that they've wanted have obviously gone elsewhere, but that's the nature of this business. But they've done well, and we'll ultimately see if this all comes together. But it seems like Utah has plugged the positions that they need. And it's a little different than what they did last year in terms of rebuilding the offense. I think they're doing it in it's a similar way, but at the same time, it's done in a way where you have much more of your core together. And so there's not as much worry that you need to hit in specific positions. You still do, right? Every position needs to improve and grow, but I think Utah has a little bit more margin of error than they did last year, where if Devon Dampier came in and just honestly couldn't live up to the potential in a P4, suddenly hurt. Wayshawn Parker comes and, he can't rush very well and just kind of fizzled out. Utah's in a much different position. There's a lot more stability this year than what they've had last year. Even with Kyle taking coaches and players, there's a lot more consistency. So I think, you're going to see a lot of opportunities here for Utah to grow. And I think, as of right now, things are going well for Utah. So with that, like I said, we'll keep that one short, and we may do something later in the week if it merits it. But for the most part, we'll probably just do these weekly for football. We'll probably sprinkle in some basketball, gymnastics kind of stuff from time to time, but obviously football is where most people want to hear certain things. So with that, we'll continue to see how this goes. The transfer portal ends this week. I'm looking forward to that. Tired of looking at my phone constantly, talking to people, texting people, yada, yada, yada. But we're going to get through this all together. So with that, we'll sign out. Have a great day, and we'll chat next time.